Namaste, namaste. What's up? It's Yogi Ev coming at you with another episode of Evan Talks. Thanks for coming to this episode. This is the show that takes deep dives into fascinating topics. And this week we're continuing our deep dive into medical cannabis, which is certainly a fascinating topic. Last week's episode, we got into hemp-sourced CBD. I reviewed 3 leading brands of CBD oil on their websites looking for 7 criteria as a medical cannabis expert. And if you missed that episode, you can catch up with that. You'll find a link in the description of the video tonight. Now, tonight, we're going to focus on cannabis flower sourced CBD, which is higher in THC. And we're going to focus on stories tonight. We're going to hear from 2 leading women in the cannabis industry, and they're going to bring different perspectives as to the uses of medical cannabis and how it's helping them. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce our first guest. She is a writer-producer who says that cannabis cured her cancer and helped her get off I think over 10 prescription medications. This seems like a good enough time for me to make a personal disclosure. If you don't know this about me already, I also used to be on over 10 prescription medications for a whole host of conditions, and I've gotten off all of them for over 10 years now, and medical cannabis takes a lot of the credit for that. Yoga takes a lot of the credit for that as well. So without further ado, let's welcome Sharon Letts. Hi, Sharon.
Hi, Evan.
Thanks for joining us tonight. I really appreciate having you here.
Happy to be here.
Last week, as you know, I really dived into hemp-sourced CBD. And this week and next week, I'm going to be getting more into the cannabis flower CBD today and really all about medical THC next week. And I want to get into medical THC this week as well, particularly with how the THC and CBD act together and how they help each other. So I know that you have a lot of experience with that. Before we get into that, for our audience that doesn't know you, Sharon's, writes, she's well known. You're published all over the world in different languages. But for people who have never encountered you before tonight, just give us a little bit about who you are and how you got into this space and why it's important to you, please.
Okay. Well, I'm from the 70s. I came of age in I graduated high school in 77. So, cannabis was no stranger to any of us. I didn't realize it was medicine when I was 16, although it did help me focus more in school. And I've never written anything without it. I started being published at 19 as a poet, and it was because of cannabis. So about 10 years ago, I was a writer-producer for television in Los Angeles. I produced documentary and magazine shows for television, and I was brought up to Humboldt County to produce a news show for local TV. And I was ready to leave Los Angeles. My daughter wanted to go to school up there, to college. And so I went up to produce a news show. And 5 years ago, while working in media in Humboldt County, television and newspaper, I was the in-house feature writer for the Times-Standard. And I presented with breast cancer. And it wasn't a tumor. It was lobular carcinoma. It was a spider web mass in one of my breasts. And only 10 to 15% of all women have it. So because I was in Humboldt, I was given this oil. And they said the medicine maker in southern Humboldt that gave it to me is Pearl Moon. She's one of the Bud sisters. They've been making medicine for many years in southern Humboldt. And she said, take this oil, it will go away. Your cancer will go away. And of course, I'm from mainstream media, and, I wouldn't have been able to write about that in the newspaper, even in Humboldt County. So I had my doubts. I didn't think it would work, but I did it anyway because Pearl and, whatever. So the first night I took the oil, I didn't need a sleeping pill. The next day I didn't need my painkillers. In 2.5 weeks, upwards of 10 prescription meds plus supplements went away. And in 2.5 months, the cancer went away. So it was actually as if God, took this person with a voice from Los Angeles, dropped me in Humboldt County, and gave me cancer. And, now I had this voice. So the first magazine I wrote for was High Times, and I've written for every weed publication since.
Okay, so if you could, for our audience, last week, again, we really focused on hemp source CBD And I talked about the importance of making sure it's full spectrum, which means some of the other cannabinoids are in there. And I kind of hinted that today we were going to dip our toes deeper into the THC waters by effectively talking about CBD medicine that has higher THC than just the trace amounts. So
Right.
I'm wondering if you could talk about that for my audience for a little bit and talk about why
Okay.
that's important. Why is that a
Yeah.
big thing?
Well, all medicinal plants have many beneficial compounds within them. Cannabis has the most of all of them. It has upwards of 500 beneficial compounds, many of which we haven't even isolated and found out what they can do. So that's ongoing research that is being done and needs to be done. THC was first isolated in 1967 in Israel. CBD, cannabinoids, were isolated actually in the United States in the early 90s. So we know that it works together. The whole plant theory works for, I do the whole plant oil because I'm on maintenance for the breast cancer, and I don't take pharmaceuticals anymore. This is my only medicine. So CBD only was actually hybridized. It was a plant hybridized in southern Humboldt by Lawrence Ringo. He was a cannabis farmer in southern Humboldt, and he had chronic pain himself. He suffered, but he didn't want to be high all day long. So he wanted to hybridize a plant where the THC would be lower. And as he started doing that, he found that CBD was up higher, so he kept choosing plants in the process with higher CBD, and that's how we got the high CBD. But it has traces of THC, and even the children who are on the CBD with the 3% or less of THC, they find that they get used to that at a certain level, and you have to gradually start adding the THC for it to still be effective. And it's kind of a balancing act that they do. And that's not really talked about very much because the whole taboo and stigma about THC, oh, what about the children? Well, the children need a little bit too. And the thing is, the fear of THC is so great. As I said, I first started smoking at 16 in high school. I was failing school. I wasn't considered not very bright. And as you know me, Evan, you know I'm a little bit bright, right, as an adult.
Very bright.
But I was struggling in high school. I couldn't learn traditionally. And so that first morning, I was walking to school, and I stopped in a gas station bathroom, and a couple of other girls that were with me lit up a joint. And that was the first day in school that I could sit there and focus on my schoolwork. So it actually was my Ritalin. So when you see children at 13 smoking cannabis and it actually works for them, what's their diagnosis? Are they ADD? Are they under the autistic spectrum? We know that THC helps with this. I know that it does. We don't want them to be smoking a 31% before school, though. You know what I'm saying? There's balance. There's education that has to be done so that you understand why you're medicating. Because we know when we smoke that it feels good, right?
It's a good point as well. And because it's been criminalized, not to mention demonized, a lot of these tests that are going to help us with figuring out proper dosage or different recommendations for different ages or different conditions.
Yes.
These tests are just kind of beginning now because people aren't getting arrested for just trying to do the tests. At the same time, you're absolutely right. I used to be medicated for a whole bunch of conditions that I found that for me, yoga and cannabis helps keep me regulated.
Yes.
And I use it for my attention. I use it for my energy. I've used it to lift my moods for depression. I've used it to quell my anxiety. And sometimes I've found, like before interviews, if I smoke, my eyes get all glazy and then I can't really function on camera as much as my mood sometimes makes me want to smoke. Sometimes I can't because I'm trying to be functional.
So education of the plant helps you to medicate smarter. So the thing is, if you're smoking too much and you're in that fog all day because you're not feeling well, so you're smoking a lot because smoking is immediate, if you ingesting lasts hours longer, you have a different overall feeling of well-being that lasts much longer, and you don't have to smoke as much. So, it's just knowing what you need.
That's interesting too, because, edibles, while I was working in the industry most recently, I really became hip to microdosing on edibles.
Yes.
As honestly kind of the answer to a lot of my previous problems with edibles, and a lot of people that I know that don't smoke, that maybe went to a party one time and someone had made pot brownies, and then God only knows how much was in each brownie, and
right.
People end up not knowing that it takes a couple of hours to kick in, so they eat way too much, and
yes.
then they get the death spins and they get afraid, and then all of a sudden
yep.
they say, "Oh, THC is the devil," and they'll never do it again. And
so when I started sharing my own cancer story and how all the pharmaceuticals fell away, people started writing me. They've been writing me from all over the world about advice and help. And the minute I say, well, you have to ingest to get the full spectrum of the plant for your serious ailment, oh no, I had a pot brownie in the 60s, I don't want to go there again, But again, I always think it's irresponsible to bring a tray of pot brownies to a party where people are boozing on alcohol, because you might as well give them a half a tab of acid. You're going to have an outer body experience,
It's true. Those things interact.
There again, it's education. It's knowing.
Yeah. So microdosing, for people who don't know, is the idea that instead of making your cannabis edibles as strong as they can possibly be, with the hope that they will kick in faster so people will eat less so they won't overeat.
It's the recreation mindset. Yeah.
And you can't overdose on cannabis. Nobody's ever died from overdosing on cannabis, but you can certainly take too high of a dose, meaning that you're not going to enjoy the result. And
not fun.
Microdosing is kind of eating a very low dose on a kind of regular basis, so that you always have a little bit in your bloodstream. And what I used to recommend to people is start with 5, maybe 10 milligrams every couple of hours, and just drop a teeny bit in. And I always describe it like when you're cooking, like you're cooking with salt. You can always sprinkle a little bit more in, but if you put too much in too fast, it ruins the whole dish, and you can't change it. You can't fix it. So now we got off topic a little bit, but I'm really interested more in the cancer, in the way that either CBD or THC and CBD, because I have read that the THC is what's been found to kill the cancer cells, like in rats where they've done testing.
That's since the 1960s. From Israel, we've known this. Yeah.
And so I know that CBD has become very palatable because people are so afraid of THC that they hear that the CBD doesn't get you high, but it has all these medicinal benefits. So it's a double-edged sword. It's opening the door, and people are becoming aware, and they're able to try it and maybe recommend it to a family member or a friend at the same time, without fully understanding how important the THC component is. People look at CBD only as if it could be a cure-all, and then sometimes when they don't get the results that they're looking for, they say, well, it's kind of hogwash, it doesn't really mean anything, but they haven't really tried it the way that you're recommending it.
Well, the thing is that you can have deliveries with high THC without the THC being activated. Like I do microdosing all day long with all my olive oils, my vinegars, everything in my kitchen is microdosed, because when I cook, everything's microdosed. I just keep it in my system all day long.
Okay, so that's great. So if you use a small enough amount, and you have a tolerance, obviously, so you could take more than the average person who's just getting started.
But anyone can build their tolerance in a matter of weeks.
And that's kind of, it's interesting, because that's when I wrote my commentary to the proposed regulations in California, I specifically talked about how quickly people build tolerances to THC, and how they made maximum dosage for edibles and beverages in California, which are very low. It's like 100 milligrams per package.
Right.
And it has to be dosed out at 10 milligrams a dose. And I say, well, that's great for newbies after a
Right.
few months of being on that, they're going to want a higher dose, and now they're going to have to buy multiple packages and eat more sugar and more processed whatever else went into that food.
Or they do what I do. They do a kitchen apothecary, and you make your own products at home, you know.
Ooh, a kitchen apothecary. I love it.
Yeah.
For
Yeah.
somebody who has never heard those terms before, kitchen apothecary, can you
Yes.
first tell us what that means? And second, tell us how you go about preparing or building something like that.
Okay. So the pharmaceutical industry wasn't began in the US until the late 1930s. Before that, for hundreds of years, before the Industrial Revolution, all we had on this planet were us and plants. Beneficial herbs have a fragrance because we have a nose. It's a symbiotic relationship. So it was called apothecary. Apothecaries were, they set up shop, they were like druggists. It was all plant-based. The first Surgeon General in the United States was not called the Surgeon General. It was right after the Civil War, and he was called the Apothecary General.
Wow.
Because in the Civil War, when you think about it, all they had were plant-based remedies, and they had cannabis oil. Cannabis oil was used before morphine and for pain. So apothecary is the making of remedies with plants, and people used to do it on their stovetop apothecary, kitchen apothecary. If you can make a reduction or a sauce in your kitchen as a cook, you can make a reduction of an alcohol plant-based concentrate. If you can infuse a cup of tea, you can infuse herbs into water, alcohol, vinegar, whatever, to make a medicine.
Wow. Okay, this is great. So, I mean, without getting into an actual how-to, we can always actually do one of these coming down the pike if you want. We can
I would
do
love to, yeah.
how-to, like a cannabis cooking show, or how to make an apothecary. And
Apothecary.
if that would be really cool.
It's what Grandma used to do. I mean, you know, when Peter Rabbit's mother, when Peter Rabbit ate Farmer McGregor's garden in Beatrix Potter's book, he came home with a tummy ache, and his mother made him a cup of chamomile tea. That's kitchen apothecary at its finest. And she put him to bed because chamomile induces sleep. It helps with digestion, pain, infection, inflammation, just like cannabis does.
That's amazing. So let's get back to the cancer. When you had, how many years have you been cancer-free now?
It was October 2012 when it went away with the cannabis oil.
Wow.
Yeah.
And the cannabis oil, because I've read about this, I've never tried it or seen it. Is this the same as Rick Simpson oil that people talk about?
It is. You know, that's an honorary name, Rick Simpson oil. Rick was just an engineer from Canada. He had some ailments. He found this old honey oil recipe online that we used to make in the 70s. Found something from Israel saying that it kills cancer cells, etc. And he made it for himself. And the power of this remedy is evidenced in how quickly it spread around the world in just a little over 15 years. Because of his recipe in Canada, I was able to put my cancer into remission in Humboldt County 5-6 years ago. So it's an alcohol reduction. It's very simple, and it's very strong. It's upwards of 80-90% THC, which is what kills cancer cells.
This has been really, really helpful. If people want to learn more, where can they do that?
Well, you know, there's many, many good sources on the web. I have my own website with apothecary. I have an apothecary page where there's recipes. I just keep it very, very simple, and day to day do different recipes and deliveries of keeping plant-based concentrates in my system.
That's terrific.
Yeah.
So you're SharonLetts.com, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so anybody watching, you're going to see a link to that right here in the video, and you'll see it in the description of the video. Check out Sharon's website and read more about it. I'm sure there's a contact page there if people want to write you with a story or ask a question. Yeah. And again, for my audience, if you watch this segment and you have follow-up questions you'd like me to ask Sharon, please reach out to me and ask me, and we'll do a follow-up. And Sharon, I'd love to have you back here. Thank you so much for coming on and talking to me today.
Thank you, Evan.
I'll talk to you soon. Thanks.
Okay,
our next guest tonight, Tracy Ryan, is the CEO of CannaKids, and CK Sciences, pioneering some amazing research into medical cannabis over in Israel that we're going to hear about tonight. And Tracy is also the founder of SavingSophie.org. Please welcome to the show, Tracy Ryan. Hey, Tracy, thanks for coming on.
Thanks for having me. I'm happy to be here.
So before we get started, I want you to start by, if you would, telling us a little bit about you, about CannaKids, about Sophie, and catch us up really on kind of who's Tracy Ryan, where are you coming from, how'd you get into this, and what are you working on?
Okay, that's going to take me a second, but I will do my best.
Take your time. We're in no hurry.
My little girl, Sophie, who's now 5, was diagnosed with a really rare brain tumor at 8.5 months old. It's called an optic pathway glioma because it follows the optic track. So optic meaning eyes, pathway meaning the pathway in which those nerves lead, and then the tumor wraps around those. So at 8.5 months old, after being born completely healthy, 9 pounds, 7.4 ounces, chubby and beautiful, her left eye started to shake. So we took her to her pediatrician on Monday. By Tuesday, we were seeing ophthalmology. By Wednesday, we were seeing neurology. And by Friday, she was in an MRI scanner. That weekend, she was diagnosed. So in the course of 5 days, our entire lives were completely turned upside down. Day 7 was that diagnosis day. And after that, our lives have never been the same. And through this weird chain of events on social media, we were connected with Ricky Lake and Abby Epstein. And they had brought cannabis to us because at the time, chemotherapy was really the only option for my daughter. And it was one of those really, really gut-wrenching sensations when you find out that the only way that you can treat your kid is by surgically inserting a port into their chest, which needles have to be jammed into week after week, and these toxins have to be pumped into. And with this tumor, the chemo, unfortunately, was never really supposed to make it shrink. That's what's so unique about these low-grade tumors. They grow slow, so the chemo isn't able to go on board and arrest the development of it because it can't gobble up the cells unless they're splitting at the exact time the chemo is inside the body. So we were looking at potentially years and years of chemotherapy because it wasn't ever supposed to get rid of these tumors. Now, she had a high survival rate of around 95%, but an 85% recurrence rate. So when Ricky and Abby were brought into our lives and we were introduced to them, I had already been huge fans of them, watched Ricky growing up my whole life, loved the movie The Business of Being Born, tried for a natural labor with my own child and made it 24 hours before I had to tap out and get the drugs. It took me 31 hours to get that kid out. And I was told that they were producing this new film, which is titled Weed the People. And it was about using cannabis oil for pediatric cancer. Now, just as a side note, the documentary was accepted to South by Southwest, and we're having our world premiere next month in Austin, Texas. So we're super excited about that.
Congratulations.
Thank you. But back to the story, we were amazed with the research that they brought to us and all the studies that were currently being done on glioma cells in lab rats and in mice and the success rate they were seeing. So we took this information to Sophie's oncologist and presented to them. They'd never heard about this ever, but they were willing to let us try. I don't think that dropping Ricky Lake's name hurt us at all. And us being normal parents that were clearly well-meaning, who loved our child deeply, and were researching everything in the planet we could. We brought them all kinds of diet nutrition questions, all kinds of holistic questions. And this was the one that really we were the most excited about. And they gave us their full blessing to go forth with this treatment.
So then what happened from there? How did you get started?
So Ricky got us like 7 or 8 different syringes of oil. She provided us thousands of dollars worth of medicine right out of the gate, got us some dosing guidance, and Sophie took her first dose of cannabis oil on camera at 9 months old. So in March, people will get to really watch this baby's first dose of THC, and it was THC that we gave her the first time. So over the next 13 months of her first protocol, what was really incredible about what we were seeing is this tumor that we were told was very unlikely to shrink and was going to absolutely take Sophie's vision from her because we wouldn't be able to shrink the tumor fast enough to unstrangle the nerves that the tumor had wrapped around. We started to see incredible amounts of shrinkage, up to almost 95%. shrinking down.
Wow.
And not only that, but she suffered from 9 blood transfusions her first 9 months on chemotherapy. And 4 months before she got off this 13-month protocol, she just stopped needing blood transfusions. We didn't know at the time that that was medically impossible. And her oncologist literally set us down, confirmed with us that he had met with the other oncologists. There was 3 oncologists in total that treated her. And they all agreed that there's no way this was possible. And they wanted to give cannabis the credit. Now, unfortunately, they took Sophie off of chemo way too early. They followed the textbooks. The textbook said 13-month protocol and you stop. But Sophie's tumor was still responding on that very last scan, meaning that there was still activity in the tumor. It had not completely stabilized. So what we saw on the next scan about 30 days later was that the tumor has started to slightly grow again. Then it stabilized. Then it started to grow a little bit more. And then at the end of a 6-month watch and wait period, the entire tumor exploded and the whole thing grew back in 8 weeks.
Whoa.
Yeah. So we ended up starting her back on another treatment protocol. And this has been kind of the roller coaster that is our life over the last 4.5 years. And that's the thing with the cannabis is we don't exactly know what we need to be giving her. And because of the research that we're doing in Israel right now in the Technion Institute we're sponsoring alongside Cure Pharmaceutical, we know that it is cannabinoid and terpenoid and flavonoid specific as to what blocks the mutations that drive specific cancers. And we just don't know what it is completely yet that's driving Sophie's. We are working towards that research on her brain tumor sample, though, as we speak.
So how is her tumor now? Like, what's the status now?
So the mass majority of the tumor inside of her brain is stable, but there is a big spot that started up last year that has continued to be problematic. We have restricted all of the blood flow to that tumor, which was an incredible response using Avastin and irinotecan alongside the cannabis oil therapy. Her initial response was quite impressive, but we did see a minuscule amount of growth, only about 7% on the last scan. It's 25% for them to really call it growth. And there was a tiny little bit of blood flow coming back. We do have to do another scan on the 14th on Valentine's Day, unfortunately. But we're expecting that we're going to probably need to change her treatment protocol. The thing is, though, with these tumors, if you can keep the child from going blind and if you can keep them healthy, that's really the goal. That's the end goal to these. Because while they're growing and they're going through all these growth spurts, the hormones in their body, they're feeding these tumors. So, again, another reason why they're so incredibly problematic. But one of the interesting things about her story and about where she's at today is she just recently saw her neurologist because last year she was really suffering from what's called epsom seizures or stop and stare seizures. And she'd lost an enormous amount of weight, become very thin. And we can't treat epilepsy the same way we treat cancer. Cancer is a very high dose. Epilepsy is traditionally a very low dose. So we had to pick which one we wanted to treat. So the cannabis wasn't getting rid of the seizures. It was just treating the cancer. And we had to put her on Keppra, which she was completely benign for her. She had no ill responses to, and it stabilized the seizure activity. Since last year, she's gained 17 pounds. The kid is a tank, and she's never once needed to increase her Keppra dose, and Keppra is weight-based. And the tumor has gotten bigger since last year. So her neurologist looked at us, and I was like, Dr. Holder, is this something that is possible with that kind of weight gain? And she goes, Tracy, this is exceptional, but she's on the cannabis, so don't stop what you're doing.
So it's kind of, for me as a layperson who, all of these terms are new to me, so it might be overwhelming for some of my audience that's trying to keep up too. So thanks for taking us through this with, such specific detail. How does CannaKids kind of fit into this, and how are you... in terms of like last week's episode, I was all about hemp CBD and trace amounts of THC. This week, I want to talk way more about the flower sourced CBD and kind of higher ratios of THC. And is there anything you can talk about to the cannabis that you are certain is having certain effects? Because Sophie's on so many other medications and treatments. And as you said, it's hard to attribute the cannabis, though, even though your doctors are attributing a lot of the benefits to the cannabis. So I'd love to talk about that, about not only the benefits of higher THC in CBD oil for children, but some of the objections that we hear about either giving THC to children, dangers of the developing brain processing THC. I've heard all kinds of stuff, and I would love to get your feedback or input on that if you have any to share.
You know, it always really shocks and surprises me that people still demonize this plant when we've been using it for 3,000 years and not one person has ever died. Not to mention there's over 17,000 published articles that are medically founded in what this plant can do and how beneficial it is. CannaKids was originally started several years ago, about 3.5, 4 years ago now. When Sophie first got diagnosed, me and some incredible moms started a secret group on Facebook, and we really started to see this need for support and for lab-tested medicine and for medical professional guided dosing, and that's when CannaKids was born. And through this process, we have treated so many different types of children and adults, really patients of all ages, but we always keep THC in our arsenal. Always. And what's so beautiful about this plant is that our body actually builds a tolerance to it after a few days. So if you understand titration and you're working with somebody who can build a dosing protocol for you, like our nurses at CannaKids, which you can book a phone call with them right on our website, then you really can't avoid the psychoactivity in children. Now, for adults, the psychoactivity can be phenomenal. I know for me it is personally. It really helps me with my anxiety and with my sleeplessness. It helps me become centered, and I swear it makes me smarter. I come up with some of the most brilliant ideas when I have a little bit of THC and I'm a little bit psychoactive, and it can really, really, truly help to open the mind and calm the spirit. And what we found, especially in our autism community, is that THC is extraordinarily beneficial in its raw form in what's called THCA. This is a non-psychoactive part of the plant. When you heat it, it's called decarboxylation. It becomes a different molecule, which is the activated THC or delta-9 THC. That's what makes you more high. So you can actually use the non-psychoactive or psychoactive, or sometimes in combination, to find incredible therapies that are reversing all kinds of self-injurious behaviors, severe rage, sleeplessness in these children. I mean, we've got autism kids that have never slept through the night a day in their life until they took cannabis. If you can imagine that as a parent, never getting a good night's sleep for 3 or 4 solid years.
Wow. And then how is this? Is it tincture based? Like, how is it given?
Yeah, so what we do is we do a CO2 extraction in our oil. We reintroduce specific terpene profiles that we consider to be indication specific, meaning we have a line for autism, we have a line for epilepsy, we have lines for cancer, pain, sleep, and so forth, because we've identified terpene profiles that in combination with the oils work synergistically to help eliminate some of these varying problems that all of these other diseases and issues can cause. We then use MCT oil, organic, which is fractionated coconut oil, to blend it in, because the original cannabis oil is very thick and sticky and viscous, and it's very, very hard to dose out of just a straight syringe. So by mixing it with MCT oil, it thins it out. Our bottles are these little blue bottles with what's called a reducer cap on top, which is much like what you see on the top of the Tylenol bottle. You just stick a 1 ml syringe in the top, you turn the bottle upside down, and you pull out the dose that the nurse recommends. You pop it in your mouth and you swallow it down.
That sounds very easy.
Very easy
to do.
It takes 2 seconds to take a dose of cannabis.
It sounds so helpful and cutting edge, really, in terms of natural healing. The question I have is, how are you are you having trouble with the FDA with like making any formulation where you say, well, this is good for a specific illness or a disease? Can't you get in trouble for that?
Well, we can, technically, but we haven't, which is great. We don't make claims on our website. We used to share some of the most incredible patient testimonies with the patient's first name and their pictures and recounts of the family's actual experiences with their child. As you may know, some letters from the FDA had been going out to mostly it was, I think, pretty much all hemp companies, but they were making anonymous claims. They didn't have pictures of the patients, that they didn't have their names listed. It was like 1 or 2 sentences, which anybody can make up. Ours were completely different than that, but we did take them off of our website because we don't want to get in trouble. Now, when we're talking with our patients and we're saying, if you have autism them, we recommend our Spectrum line because this is what we have found to be beneficial in alleviating side effects. We don't ever claim that any of these medicines cure disease. And that would be absolutely irresponsible for anyone to do that because we just don't have the science. We've not had human trials that go all the way from phase 1 to phase 3 so that we can evaluate the differences between someone taking a placebo versus someone taking an actual cannabis product, and then looking at what's happening long term after they have stopped taking the oil or how the oil is affecting them over a long-term period of time, which is what we're actually planning to do as we speak. We've got several hospital partners around the country, and we're in the planning phases of 4 different pediatric human trials as we speak.
Wow, that's. I just wanted to ask you about that because you had touched on some of the tests you're doing in Israel. And you mentioned another company that you're doing tests with. So is there anything more you can say about that? I know that you're in proprietary tests and you can't really share a lot of the details, but what else can you tell us about what you're doing there? Because it's very exciting that testing is happening.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, first of all, going back to the making claims thing, we have been meticulously tracking our patients' data for many, many years, and we've found patterns. And one of the most exciting patterns that we have found is in our autism community with a specific strain, specific terpene profile that we're re-adding into that oil. It's a THCA-based oil, and then a specific dosing protocol that we're finding is working across many, many, many different children, about a 95% success rate. Sometimes we need to add in a little bit of THC. Sometimes we need to add in a little tiny bit of CBD. But overall, we found a stable protocol that we're now doing what's called a retrospective on, where you're analyzing the data, you're writing it up in a medical publication, and we're going to publish that to the medical journal. So that's something we're very, very close to finalizing as we speak. Then the Technion Institute in Israel, we've got a team of 35 scientists. We're funding their next 4 years of cancer research. And we've already gone through year 1 with them. They've been working at this for many, many, many years. We hopped in last year and took over, not took over, but offered them funds to continue their work and build a much larger team. So in that time, they've gone from a team, I think they had about 10 or 12 people when we started working with them. They now have about a team of 35 and growing. And we're already in our first post-animal model phase. So we started a well plate trial where we're doing like machine trials is essentially what that means, where we're checking different strains of cannabis on different cancer cell lines to see what is eradicating the diseases most effectively in machines. Then we go to animals and we do this in mice and we grow the cancers inside the mice. Then once we have found that it works in the mice as it did in the machine model, we then move into human tissue. So we're in human tissue. We're finding the same kind of eradication in cancer for one type of pediatric disease in animals. We're finding the same response in human tissue. And we've now submitted for approval to the Ministry of Health to get approval to go into actual human beings. And we're hoping to get that, I believe, in the next 3 to 6 months. And at that point, we will be then moving that protocol into human beings and hopefully finding a really, really amazing, groundbreaking medical breakthrough that we will then publish, patent, and start making medicines for the mass public. So that's what's going on in Israel. We also have trials here in the United States that we're working on, that we're planning with some of the top pediatric hospitals in the country, one for autism, end-of-life pain with children who are refractory to opioids, meaning the opioids are no longer working, as an adjunct to chemotherapy or for chemotherapy pain. And we're also, which is near and dear to my heart, waiting on a budgeted proposal from a hospital in the Midwest to look at many different types of pediatric brain cancer.
Wow, that's a lot.
It's a lot. I'm very busy.
It's really exciting. I had one thing that you didn't touch on, and I'm not sure if you have feedback on this, but I got an email when I was asking people for questions about tonight's episode and next week's episode. And one of them was from a father whose son has been diagnosed with ADHD, and he's been put on Adderall already. And the kid's really young. I forget exactly how old he is, but I think he's only like 5 or 6 or 7. And both parents seem to be open. They're divorced, but they seem to be open-minded about wanting to get their son off of Adderall and possibly onto cannabis treatment, but they can't find a doctor that would sign off on it. And
where do they live?
They live here in Los Angeles, so we can talk offline. I gave him a recommendation. I told him to call Dr. Frankel, actually. I thought that Dr. Frankel would do it, but
well, all they need to do is go to Dr. Bonnie Goldstein at www.canna-centers.com. She has also recently brought in a pediatrician, a pediatric oncologist, which I know isn't autism or ADHD, but she has a pediatric oncologist whose name is Dr. Storch, who comes to us from Kaiser. And she was the oncologist to one of our most incredible success stories. And once she saw the eradication of disease in this boy who was end of life with no chance of survival, she decided this was an industry that she wanted to get into. And both of these women write pediatric recommendations and would be happy to help this family. And this protocol that I'm talking about, Evan, is the same protocol that we use on ADHD and ADD. And we have gotten so many children completely off of these toxic pharmaceuticals that can sometimes be very addictive.
They really can. And to start at such a young age, it's such the over-medication of a whole generation. So thank you for those recommendations.
Yeah, of course. No problem.
Wow. So is there anything we didn't touch on yet? Like in terms of your message, do you have a message to parents? Do you have a message to voters? Do you have a message to doctors? You know, anyone you want to talk to based on your entire experience, the wisdom that you have to offer, and speaking to where we need to move the needle. You know, there's still a lot of stigma. A lot of the stigma is lifting now. A lot of the states have medical cannabis, and people are interested. So people who are interested, but they're still afraid, for instance, they're still, you know, stuck on the reefer madness, or the THC is going to make me stupid, or it's going to make my kid not able to get into college, or it's, you know, anything. What's the message? What's the takeaway?
Well, first of all, I take cannabis every single night of the week as soon as I get home in microdoses, and I run 3 companies every day. So it definitely does not make you stupid. I can tell you that. Now, if you're smoking, you know, joints all day and doing bong rips and dabbing and everything else, yeah, you might get a little slowed down. But there's absolutely a way to use cannabis medically to benefit you and keep you off of pharmaceuticals, because we all have issues. I don't know one person that can't benefit from this, whether it's aches and pains or sleeplessness or anxiety or depression or, you know, just focus issues. I mean, they talk about how cannabis makes you can't focus when you're on cannabis, but if you take the right strains and you medicate properly, it can actually improve focus. And my message to the world is educate yourself. Take the time to do a Google search. If you don't understand why this plant has been demonized in the first place, look up what happened in the 1930s with Harry Anslinger and William Randolph Hearst, and why this plant was made to be illegal in the first place. It was all political prowess and trying to elevate themselves into higher power, and then also money. They wanted to make money. They wanted to keep all the hemp farms away because they didn't want that to come in and replace their tree farms where they were making millions of dollars on paper mills. Educate yourself. One of the websites that we have, it's an incredible place where you can do that, is savingsophie.org. And it's SOPHIE, savingsophie.org.
I'll put that link up on the video.
Thank you. We have a whole section there called Cannabis Studies, and we have gone and found hundreds of different articles and published research, and we have summarized it so it's easier to read and figure out if that's something that you actually want to click through to the website where we got that information from and read the whole piece. And there's all kinds of information on there for cancer, epilepsy, autism, the endocannabinoid system, and beyond. You can also learn about our Rally for Kids with Cancer that's coming up in May that we're using to help raise money to build continuing medical education programs for doctors and nurses, because you can't go to college for cannabis right now. So if we want these doctors and nurses to perform these human trials for us, they have to be educated. So we're raising a lot of money to build these courses that we hope to license to other hospitals and universities around the world, so that these doctors and nurses can finally learn what you and I both know, that cannabis is a beautiful plant that's non-toxic, that won't kill you, that has more medical benefits than any other plant or medicine on the face of the planet.
That is a really good way to stop. Thank you so much, Tracy Ryan. You really covered it, and I really appreciate you coming on today and sharing your knowledge, your experience, your wisdom with me, with the audience, and I would love to have you back on a future show, and thanks for coming on.
Thank you for having me.
Well, I hope you enjoyed tonight's interviews. We are just getting started with medical cannabis. There is so much material to cover. We can't possibly do it all in 3 weeks, but we're doing this 3-week deep dive to give you all a real good broad overview of this world. Okay, we started last week with hemp source CBD. Tonight was more about cannabis flower CBD and the interaction of CBD with higher percentages of THC. Next week, we're going to go all into THC, okay? I'm going to talk more about my own personal experience with it. I'm going to give you more information about the different forms of medical cannabis, and it's going to be a great show. You're not going to want to miss it. If you like this content, please like the videos, share them, subscribe to my channel. The community is growing. It's super exciting, and I'm glad to have you on board. Thanks for coming to this episode of Evan Talks. I will see you next week. This is Yogi Ev signing out. Peace.